Alina Harasimenko was born in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. She loved playing her cello since she was a child. But her life changed when war broke out in her homeland. In 2014, she witnessed shells raining down on her community for weeks. She and her family had to flee to western Ukraine. They lived there for 9 years, hoping for peace. But peace never came. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine again. Alina was living near the Ivano-Frankivsk airport when bombs were dropped right outside of her apartment. She had to escape with only her cello, her computer, and a small amount of food. She left behind her family, her friends, and her home. She arrived alone in Canada as a refugee. She was welcomed by a host family who introduced her to a piece of music that touched her heart. It was called Volodymyr's Plea, composed by Suzanne de Montigny, A.B.C. woman who was inspired by the Ukrainian president's speech to Canada's parliament. A few months later, Alina was invited to perform the cello for this piece with the Ukrainian folk orchestra in Vancouver. She felt a deep connection with the music and the message. She said it was like destiny. Alina continues to play the cello to remind Canadians and Ukrainians of the war in her country. She hopes that one day, she will be able to return to a free and peaceful Ukraine. Growing up in Ukraine, Alex had a difficult childhood. He was born with a speech impediment that made him stutter and slur his words. He was often bullied and teased by his classmates and teachers. He felt isolated and lonely. But Alex had a secret talent. He loved music. He would listen to the radio and try to imitate the sounds of different instruments with his mouth. He would hum melodies and rhythms in his head. He would tap his fingers on any surface he could find. One day, when he was 10 years old, he saw a violin in a pawn shop window. He was mesmerized by its shape and color. He begged his parents to buy it for him, but they couldn't afford it. They were refugees who had fled from the war-torn region of Donetsk. They barely had enough money to pay for food and rent. Alex didn't give up. He started saving every penny he could find. He did odd jobs around the neighborhood. He sold some of his toys and clothes. He even skipped meals sometimes. After a year of hard work and sacrifice, he finally had enough money to buy the violin. He was overjoyed. He took the violin home and started playing it right away. He didn't have a teacher or a book. He just followed his intuition and his ear. He learned by trial and error, by listening and repeating, by improvising and experimenting. He soon discovered that playing the violin was more than just a hobby. It was a way of expressing himself, of communicating with others, of finding joy and peace. It was a way of overcoming his speech impediment, of gaining confidence and self-esteem, of making friends and connections. He played the violin every day, for hours on end. He played in his room, in the park, in the street. He played for himself, for his family, for strangers. He played classical music, folk music, pop music. He played with passion, with skill, with emotion. He attracted attention wherever he went. People were amazed by his talent and charisma. They applauded him, praised him, encouraged him. They gave him tips, gifts, opportunities. They invited him to join their bands, their clubs, their events. One of those invitations changed his life forever. It was from the B.C. Orchestra, one of the most prestigious musical groups in Canada. They had heard about Alex from a friend who had seen him perform at a local festival. They were impressed by his video clips on YouTube and social media. They wanted him to audition for them. Alex couldn't believe it. He was thrilled and terrified at the same time. He had never played in front of such a large and professional audience before. He had never traveled outside of Ukraine before. He had never dreamed of such an opportunity before. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. He packed his bags and his violin and boarded a plane to Vancouver. He arrived at the audition venue with nervous excitement. He met the conductor and the other musicians with respect and gratitude. He played his heart out on stage. He played with grace and power, with finesse and flair, with beauty and brilliance. He played like he had never played before. He received a standing ovation from the judges and the audience. He received a warm hug from the conductor and a handshake from each musician. He received an offer to join the B.C. Orchestra as their youngest and newest member. He accepted it with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. He had found his voice in music. He had found his home in Canada. The journey of a Ukrainian refugee who found his voice in a B.C. Orchestra was not easy. He had to overcome many challenges of language, culture, and discrimination. He was born in the Donetsk region, where he witnessed the horrors of war and violence. He moved to western Ukraine with his family in 2014, hoping for a better life. But in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine again, he had to flee his home with only his violin, his laptop, and some food. He arrived in Canada as a refugee, alone and scared. He did not speak English well and he felt out of place in a new country. He faced prejudice and hostility from some people who did not understand his situation or his background. But he also found support and kindness from others who welcomed him and helped him. He met a host family who introduced him to a composer from BC, Suzanne de Montigny. She had written a piece of music called Volodymyr's Plea, dedicated to the Ukrainian president and his struggle against Russian aggression. The composer invited him to join the Ukrainian folk orchestra in Vancouver and to play the violin solo for her piece. He accepted the offer and practiced hard to learn the music. He felt a deep connection with the piece, as if it was telling his own story. He performed Volodymyr's Plea at the Orpheum with the orchestra and received a standing ovation from the audience. He was proud and happy to share his culture and his voice with Canadians. He also hoped that his music would raise awareness and solidarity for his people back home. He still misses his family and friends in Ukraine, some of whom are still in danger. He hopes to find a job as a web designer or an IT manager, as he used to be in Ukraine. He also wants to continue playing music and expressing himself through his violin. He says that music is his passion and his refuge. It helps him cope with the difficulties and the trauma of his past. It also gives him hope and joy for the future. He says that music is the universal language that can bring people together, no matter where they come from or what they have been through.